The following segment is taken from my Anne Boleyn Episode 1 mini-series review. You can watch the full video for free in its entirety on KMZ History Patreon. Okay, so now brothers, sisters, the second time I watched this clock caught my attention. Now brothers, a lot of these golden clocks were gifted by the ranks of the nobility throughout all of Europe. Now this clock, brothers, reminded me of a certain painting. Now some of you brothers and sisters may already know where I'm going with this. Now for those of you brothers and sisters who've seen my first video I did on Anne Boleyn on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. So now brothers, sisters, pay attention to this golden clock. We're going to take a look at a portrait real quick. So this is the portrait that I was referencing to. Now as you can see, brothers and sisters, this sister in this portrait is holding one of those golden clocks similar to the one that we saw in the Anne Boleyn mini-series. Now for those of you brothers and sisters who have seen my video on YouTube on Anne Boleyn, where I went through the different references to her skin complexion, proving that Anne Boleyn was a so-called black woman, you would know that in that video I also used this portrait. Now in that video, brothers and sisters, I have personally identified this sister here as none other than Catherine of Aragon. Now in that video I gave my reasons to why I identified this portrait as Catherine of Aragon. Now with that being said, it doesn't mean that it's 100% Catherine of Aragon, but if it's not Catherine of Aragon, brothers and sisters, it's still somebody of nobility. But just to go over why I personally identified this sister here as Catherine of Aragon, is because of the narratives that they tell. Now as we all know, when you see the real portraits of the nobility of Europe, they like to retitle them to hide the fact that these people were nobility in Europe. So for example, I know for a fact some of you brothers and sisters have already seen this portrait floating on the internet. Now you may have seen this portrait titled things such as Portrait of an African Woman, Portrait of a Slave, Portrait of a Servant. I think they also said this was a woman named Felice, I think, who was a seamstress. They also tried to say that this was a sitter, an African sitter for a painting. But one of the narratives was that this was one of the chambermaids of Catherine of Aragon. So that told me, sometimes they subliminally tell you who they are. So that told me that you're probably actually looking at the real image of Catherine of Aragon. Now the reason why I came to that conclusion, brothers, because they did the same thing. They did the same thing with the image of Charles V. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the image of Charles V, and I'm going to show you, brothers and sisters, to what I'm talking about. But often what they would do, brothers and sisters, you know, they would take the Renaissance images of the black royalty in Europe, and they may title them such as, you know, for example, just using this woman here, they would say that this was one of the servants of Queen Maria of Austria. This was one of the bodyguards of Maria of Austria. This was one of the handmaidens of Maria of Austria, not knowing that you're actually looking at the real image of Maria of Austria. But that's just an example. But like I said, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when we get to the image of Charles V. But before we get to that, brothers, slaves and servants do not get personal paintings commissioned of themselves, especially in Renaissance Europe. Paintings were personally commissioned and they were reserved for members of nobility, people of rank, like I said, kings, queens, lords, dukes, archduchesses, marquises, barons, landowners, famous people of that time, military commanders, famous high-ranking knights, what have you. But like I said, they're going to take those images and just tell you that these are slaves and servants. And just to add a cherry on top to all of that, a lot of these paintings, brothers and sisters, were actually painted by famous renowned people of their time. And a lot of these painters were like the personal court painters of said king, queen, or duke. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at the image of Charles V. I'm going to show you, brothers and sisters, what I'm talking about. So just quickly, before we get to the image of Charles V, this is what I'm talking about, brothers. So Annabelle Karachi, peep this, portrait of a African slave woman. So this is what they do. Anytime there's a portrait of a black man or a black woman, especially in Renaissance Europe, they're just going to tell you it's a slave or a servant by default, no matter how alleged said slave or servant is dressed. As you can see just from this portrait alone, the sister is wearing fine linen. She has a golden pearl earring and she's holding, as you can see, a golden clock. You know what? Maybe it's just me. Maybe slaves back in Renaissance Europe just dressed really nicely, and they had personal portraits commissioned of themselves. This is why you always hear me make mockery, brothers and sisters. You know, when you see a black man or a black woman, you know, you will see the black man or the black woman have a golden earring. They will have like a big golden necklace. They will be wearing fine linen, and they will be wearing a golden crown, and they will still tell you that that's a slave that they decided to put on their coats of arms. But anyways, enough of that. Let's get back to the image of Charles V. Okay, so now, brothers, we're just going to read this here, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So, painted by a Dutch artist, Jan Mozart, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, 1525 to 1530, and displayed in the Rijksmuseum. The original work was long considered the only portrait of a black man in early Renaissance painting or in early European painting. That is a complete lie. Now, of course, when they first released this, that's what they tell the public. Brothers, they have all the images of the real black nobility, but they have them in places like the Smithsonian. They hide them in the Vatican. They have them in warehouses and factories. They have them held in like universities where you have to have special access to view these artifacts. They have them hidden in places like the basement, things of that nature. Or a lot of these elite, rich Caucasian billionaires, brothers, they have a lot of these real portraits in their personal collections, okay? And they release all those fake images in the museum, and you know, they reinforce this through like the Hollywood movies and the TV shows. They have all the real images of the black nobility of Europe. They're just lying. But anyways, so peep this. The subject of this painting has been tentatively identified, peep this, as Christopher Lee Moore, an archer who served at the Burgundian court of the Habsburg Emperor Charles V. That is a complete fabrication. This portrait here, as many of you already know, is actually the real image of Charles V. But this is the narrative they had to release out to the public. And you see how they said it was like the archer of Charles V. Now, we're going to check like a tweet here. So peep this. So, portrait of an African man by Jan Mozart, circa 1525 to 1530. This is the only known portrait of a black man in early European painting. That's a lie. It may be Christopher Lee Moore, an archer who served as a bodyguard to Emperor Charles V. Now, brothers, the reason why they can't really run with the slave or servant narrative is because this portrait right here of Charles V, or alleged bodyguard of Charles V, he's dressed way too nicely to be a slave or a servant. So the next best thing they can come up with, they have to say that this was probably like an African bodyguard of Charles V. And brothers, that's the deductive reasoning I gave when we look at this image right here. Going back to this image of why I identified this person as maybe Catherine of Aragon. So just like they did with Charles V, where they tried to say that was his bodyguard, they tried to say that this was the chambermaid of Catherine of Aragon. So you're probably looking at the real image of Catherine of Aragon. So that's the reasoning that I use. So, but with that being said, I could be still 100% wrong, okay? But even if this is not Catherine of Aragon, like I stated, this is still a woman of nobility regardless. But let's get back to it. So the status of this African archer was ambiguous. His skills as an archer may have made him a valued prominent member of court society, but he was certainly dependent on patronage and maybe even unfree. Now you see, brothers, they still have to reinforce that he was a slave, that this may have been a slave or a servant, even though they tried to say that this was one of the bodyguards of Charles V. They always have to reinforce that any portrait of a black man or a black woman has to always be relegated to always be a slave or a servant. They just don't want you to know that. Of course they don't. They don't want you to know. They don't want you to know that so-called blacks ever had rulership in Europe. But anyway, brothers, what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at this little article right here on this alleged portrait of an African woman, and we're going to see what they have to say about it. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to pick out the key paragraphs. But for those of you brothers and sisters who want to read the full article in your own time, just type in Annabel Karachi portrait of a woman holding a clock, or just type in portrait of a black woman holding a clock, and this portrait should come up. Excuse me. So Annabel Karachi portrait of a woman holding a clock. This 16th century portrait attributed to Annabel Karachi is valuable for its realistic depiction of a black sitter, possibly a seamstress. Now, like I was saying, you're going to see this image floating around the internet, and it's going to be relabeled many different things, such as portrait of an African, portrait of an African woman, portrait of a slave, portrait of a servant, or portrait of an African woman in Renaissance Europe. They do this on purpose because they don't want you to know, that these so-called black people are people of nobility. But let's continue. So possibly a seamstress who is dressed in a fine but sensible black day dress with touches of Italian luxury. So about the portrait. This portrait of an elegant woman in a black dress is a fragment of a painting which originally may have been twice as large but was damaged and cut down. Now this is important, so we scroll back up. Now as you can see, brothers, there's somebody standing next to her. Now for those of you who have seen my video on YouTube I did on Anne Boleyn, you would know if this is Catherine of Aragon, and one more time, that's a big if, okay? If this is Catherine of Aragon, I said the person next to her is most likely her father, Ferdinand of Aragon, or it could be Henry VIII, her husband. Now we're going to find out later that this person standing next to her is actually a woman, but we'll touch on that when we get to it. So it was painted around 1583 or 1585 and is attributed to Italian artist Annabel Karachi. If true, let me highlight that. So if true, then he would have painted this in his early 20s. Now brothers, the reason why I highlighted the if true part, now when we look at the time and the dates, the timelines don't match. And when I mean by the timelines, I'm talking about if this is Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine of Aragon passed away in 1536, and as you can see, they said that this was painted in 1583. So if Catherine of Aragon stood in for this portrait, Annabel Karachi wouldn't have been the one who painted this. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But regardless, brothers, I have to mention this over again. Even if this is not actually Catherine of Aragon, this is still a woman of nobility, somebody of notoriety. Always remember slaves and servants do not get self-portraits commissioned of themselves, okay? Especially wearing fine linen, wearing a golden pearl earring, and holding one of those luxury golden clocks. Always keep that in the back of your mind, that paintings and portraits were reserved for people of nobility, people of notoriety. So if true, then he would have painted this in his early 20s. He came from an artistic family and was born and worked in the city of Bologna in 1595. His early work consists of genre paintings and portraits like this one, but it is his later religious work, like the example in Figure 2, for which he became famous. He is considered one of the greatest painters of his generation, one of the founders of the Baroque art style, and is cited as a forefather of sketch caricature. In his paintings, he cultivated a style of broken brushwork to represent the effects of light on form, which gave his pictures an extraordinary sense of intimacy and immediacy. Mentions of this portrait in 17th and 18th century historical records refer to it as a portrait of a black woman holding a clock. At some point more recently, the sitter, a woman with dark hair, medium dark skin, and dark eyes, was relabeled, brothers, an African slave and African woman. Let's run that back. Let me highlight that. So, medium dark skin and dark eyes was relabeled an African slave and African woman. And this is what they do. You see a portrait of a black man or a black woman, so-called, and you're just automatically going to tell you it's a slave or a servant. And this is why, brothers, you always hear me in my videos make mockery of these narratives, especially when it comes to a lot of the coats of arms, because like I said, they will show you coats of arms with black men or black women on them, and these black men or black women will be dressed in fine linen. They will be ordained in like a golden necklace, wearing golden earrings, and they will be wearing a golden crown. And somehow, some way, they're still going to try and tell you that you're looking at a slave. Or what they would do, because alleged slave is dressed so nicely, they're going to tell you that it's nothing but an exotic slave, whatever the heck that means. Brothers, I've heard it all, okay? So anyways, was relabeled an African slave and African woman. Perhaps neither of these titles are true, because neither of those titles are actually true. While she may have been born in Africa and enslaved by the woman to her left. So let's roll back up to the image. So like I was saying, brothers, they said that this person next to her is a woman. Now I know for a fact, in the video I did on YouTube on Anne Boleyn about 2 years ago, I said, brothers, one of the dastardly tactics that they're going to do, for example, if they decide to release the full version of this image, what they're going to do, they're going to whitewash this woman here. Now you may be asking yourself, KMZ, why would they whitewash the woman standing next to her but leave her as a so-called black woman? Now brothers, it's because it's going to give off the illusion of white master, black servant. Basically, brothers, this black servant is taking a portrait with her white slave master, okay? Now, these are the type of manipulative tactics they're going to use, okay? So basically, brothers, and they're going to say, oh, that makes sense. The reason why she's dressed so nicely, for example, they're going to give you the house servant, the house slave, and the field slave. Basically, you know how the field slaves are going to be dressed in rags and they're going to get treated nasty. But then you have the house servant. Now the house servant is going to get more privileges and he's going to be treated better than the field servants, right? because of course the house servant is working against the field servants. Okay, now of course the house servant is going to dress nicely, so they're going to say the reason why that she's dressed in fine linen, she has a golden pearl earring, is because she's a servant of a noble. And of course servants of nobles are going to dress nicely. Okay, brothers, sisters, don't fall for the lies. Okay, don't fall for their tactics. That's what they're going to tell you. Okay, if they decide to release the full image, and if they whitewash the person standing next to her. But piggybacking off that, brothers, I'm going to show you another example of how they lie about these things. Okay, so we're going to jump over real quick, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is from a book called Revealing the African Presence in Renaissance Europe. Now, brothers, we're just going to focus on this portrait here. Now, as you can see, there's this Caucasian noblewoman, and as you can see, she has an alleged little African servant. Now, brothers, when we find out who this Caucasian woman actually is, we're going to find out this portrait does not make any sense. Okay, so watch this. So who is this woman here? So brothers, this is a portrait of Joanna of Austria, or Joanne of Austria pronounced in the English. Okay, now who was Joanna of Austria? She was the daughter of Charles V. Now stop right there. Let's go back to an image of Charles V. Okay, so now brothers, this is Charles V, okay? So, by deductive reasoning, we can safely say that Charles V's children may be, just maybe, so-called black like he is, right? So with that being said, who the heck is this? This is not Joanna of Austria. This is some random fake portrait, but like I was saying, brothers, it gives off the illusion white master, black servant. Now, let me jump back again. Fortunately for us, brothers, we actually have a real depiction of Joanna of Austria on a coinage. So this is a video I did titled Kevin Hart and the Holy Roman Empire. Does Kevin Hart know something? And I showed a lot of images in this video. So if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. So as we can see, brothers, this is Charles V, okay? So we're going to jump forward ahead and see what his daughter looks like. So now, brothers, this is Joanna, or Joan, or Joanna of Austria. And as you can see, she's a so-called black woman. One more time. Who is this? Brothers, this is a fake concocted portrait. So brothers, sisters, I've seen a lot of these floating around the internet, okay? You're going to see portrait of like Caucasian men and a woman, and they're going to have the little black African servants alleged, okay? A lot of those are fake portraits, okay? Now, brothers, with that being said, let's just say that this portrait is authentic, okay? What they've done, they've whitewashed Joanna of Austria, and they've probably touched up on her features. Now, why would they do that? Just like in this portrait here, they said that the person next to her could be her master. It is going to give off the illusion one more time that this is the white master, and she has an African servant. Okay, like I said, brothers, these are the type of manipulative tactics they're going to play on you. Don't fall for the hokey doke. All of the Habsburgs were so-called black. The Roman emperors were so-called black, okay? So-called black people ruled over the Holy Roman Empire. None of them were Caucasian. As a matter of fact, let's see what else we can extract from here. So as you can see, I have many different portraits here. Oh yeah, this statue here. So this is dubbed the Schaffhausen Moor statue, but there's a dude named Knowledge on Self on Facebook, and he identified this statue as Frederick III. Now, brothers, just from this statue alone, as you can see, the brother, he's wearing the fine linen. He has 2 golden earrings. He has the big silver chain. He's holding a golden chalice. He has a sword. He has the rings on his finger. And as you can see, brothers, he's holding a shield, and it has the insignia of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, one more time, they're going to tell you that this is none other. This is just a statue of Saint Maurice. Brothers, sisters, whenever you hear Saint Maurice, delete it out of your mind, okay? None of these statues are Saint Maurice. None of these portraits are Saint Maurice. None of these coats of arms are Saint Maurice, okay? All of these statues, portraits, and paintings are people of nobility. So-called blacks ruled Europe, okay? Like I said, the Holy Roman Emperor or Empire was ruled over by so-called black people. This segment was taken from my Anne Boleyn Episode 1 mini-series review. You can watch the full video for free on KMZ History Patreon. Click the link in the description box or click the link on the pinned comment.